Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to another episode of Our Years. Today we have a very special guest on our podcast. He's a friend of ours and actually met Rima a while back. So Rima, why don't you tell us the story of how you and Nikhil met?
Yeah, so funny story. This was back when we lived in Sunnyvale. Me and Barry lived in Sunnyvale and we were taking tennis classes. And we were taking different classes, but this one class that I was supposed to go to, I didn't go because me and Barry ran away to Napa to do some gentle day drinking. And then I went to another sort of makeup tennis class, and that's when I met Nikhil. And yeah, it's been 2 years. The tennis has plateaued, but the friendship has thrived.
Hey, we play every other week.
You guys do. You guys are very consistent in playing tennis, which is really good.
Yeah, I don't know if we're getting better.
I know that you guys just do it for the drinking after.
Yeah, after we play tennis, we go get a drink, so that's fun.
Sometimes before.
Okay,
When we have to wait
Does
for the
that
course.
sometimes during.
Sometimes during.
Yeah, it depends on the weather. Yeah, but that's how I became friends with Nikhil. I think we talked about it in a previous episode, how this is like one of those unique examples of making friends as an adult and how making friends with you was actually very easy. And then you and Barry became friends. And
Yeah.
now we're here.
And now we're here.
And Barry and I have never played tennis together.
I know. We should
That's on
change
you.
that. Well, you guys go at like 4 o'clock because you guys don't have jobs.
Right. We've
And
literally
that's
come here to talk about
Good intro
entrepreneurship.
to the entrepreneur podcast. Don't have a job.
Listen, this is goes to show when you're passionate about your things. You have flexibility in the things you do.
That's the perks of being an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
You're your own boss. You pick your own hours.
Exactly. And that's why we actually invited Nikhil here to our podcast because he is an entrepreneur and we thought it would be very fun to talk about it with him, especially because we're so unserious all the time. So it would actually be very fun to talk about like your work and what you do. So, yeah.
Okay, so I actually know this about you is that me and Nikhil both worked at a company called Mu Sigma, which is a data science consulting company. And so you had a background in data science. And then at what point did you decide to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so there was no particular point per se. I never dreamt of growing up and selling standing desks for a living. I think basically I was working in analytics. I was working for a performance marketing company. And when working over there, I kind of realized just how powerful, Meta, Facebook, and Instagram advertising is.
Okay.
I was probably 4 or 5 years too late to the game in realizing that. It was 2019.
Okay.
But essentially, I realized just how powerful it is. And then I started thinking to myself, so I used to work with a bunch of advertisers. And I always found their advertising to be very mediocre.
Okay.
But yet they were yielding good results on like Facebook and Instagram. So it started basically making me thinking like, well, if one day I came up with an idea for a product and could do better marketing, could I potentially be able to like launch a brand and to actually perform better than many of these brands that I'm like helping advertise over there. So I started thinking about it that way. At the same time, I had a friend who's a mechanical engineer and he loves building stuff.
Okay.
And I love selling stuff.
Nice.
So it was a good combination that we had over there in terms of just like he likes to build stuff, I like to sell stuff. I can go into the story a little bit of
Go for it.
that'd be
how the business came about.
Yeah.
So it was COVID. It was April 2020. And he and I were roommates. And one night, like 1 a.m. at night, I was going to the bathroom. And as all good business ideas start with. And I was passing his room. And I saw him fiddling around with a piece of a tripod and a piece of wood. And I asked him, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I couldn't find a bedside table on Amazon that I liked. So I realized I can reconfigure this tripod to support a desktop on it and make a little bedside table out of it. I'm thinking, all right, you do you, that's crazy as it is. And as I'm leaving his room, I suddenly turn around to him and I have no idea how tripods function. And I ask him, hey, could this thing go up and down? Because everybody in my office loved standing desks. And I was thinking, hey, if this thing could go up and down, with people working from home, this could potentially be a standing desk, right? Especially one that's portable and small. All of these thoughts didn't go into going through my head in a lot of detail.
Yeah, you were just curious about what
I
he
was
was
just
building.
curious. I didn't even know if a tripod could go up and down. Like that's how non-familiar I was with tripods. Anyways, of course the tripod could go up and down. We did that. We placed the laptop on it. And I was like, maybe we got something over here. And then, we spoke a little bit about it that night. We talked about potentially coming up with an ad for it. So he and I used to always talk about ideas.
Okay.
Because I was in marketing and he liked building stuff. But we never really acted on it.
Yeah.
So I gave him some ideas and potentially a video that could work on Instagram, based on what I understood. And yeah, that's it. And then a few weeks went by. We didn't do anything about it. This was never meant to be a business. This started in a complete freak moment. Anyways, a few weeks went by. I one day asked him, hey, how's that video going along? We never worked on it. And he was like, oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot. I mean, it's April 2020. People are caught up with something else.
Yeah.
So anyways, eventually he makes a video. I launch it.
What platform did you launch it on?
We launched it on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
We didn't even have a website. The business is called Intention Design. That was actually never meant to be a business. It was a personal website that he had for his own portfolio of things.
Okay.
And he wanted to build a brand and whatnot. And I was like, dude, we don't even know this is a product. We don't even know if anybody cares.
Yeah.
So I said, let's just make a landing page on your website, on your personal website. We'll drive traffic to it. And if people get to the page and, if people click on the ad, then we'll start thinking about a website.
Yeah.
So we built what was the worst landing page of all time. It was me taking pictures of him in the bedroom.
Okay.
He's got the wrong socks on. It's a messy bedroom. He asked me what shipping time frame should we put. I was like, dude, we don't even have a product. I was like, just put 1 to 3 weeks. Who cares? Nobody's going to buy it.
Oh, wow.
Right? We didn't have a product. We just had this prototype. And that was it. And some crazy person on that day decided to go to the website the next day after we started running ads and buy the desk. I don't know who.
Oh, wow.
I don't know who could have possibly gone. It was the sketchiest website ever.
How did you get people to click into the page?
Yeah, so we made an ad, and because I have done performance marketing,
Right.
I was able to run ads on Facebook and Instagram. So we started running ads.
Oh, wow.
And I think the demand for standing desks in April 2020 was so high.
Because people had just started working from home.
And every company that was selling standing
Wow.
desks was sold out for 3-4 months. That, I don't know, I guess everybody needed a desk at
Yeah.
the time. So somebody clicked on the ads, somebody went to this website, they put in their payment information and they bought it. The next morning, I woke up and I see him pasting something on the bathroom door. And I'm like, I forgot about this. I forgot about that we were running an ad because I never thought something was going to yield the next day. And I asked him, what are you doing? And he's like, dude, somebody just bought a desk. And we were mind blown. We didn't even have a desk to sell.
Wow.
For the first few months, this one person bought it, then multiple people after that bought it. He and I used to go to the local Home Depot and we used to buy big pieces of wood, saw the wood ourselves.
So handmade.
Handmade. We should have marketed that way.
You should have marketed it that
Exactly.
way. I should join the team.
There you go.
Wow, that is amazing. How did you did you do any research on the demand for this, or were you guys just okay, this is something at least your roommate needed at the time, and then because it was during COVID, and so it was just okay, maybe people might need it, and that's why you guys did it? Or did you actually do research and was okay, there's a high demand for this, so there is a market and you guys will get customers?
So I think that's a good question. We did absolutely no research before launching.
That is crazy. And then the following day you got a customer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good lesson actually that I think I would give to all entrepreneurs is that
Just do it.
More specifically with Meta, with Instagram and Facebook, it's very easy to actually test the product out and see what the real demand is. Because doing a lot of research, what a lot of people do when they're maybe thinking of starting a company is that they spend a lot of time talking to people that they know, friends and family and whatnot, getting ideas. And I feel like that's not a great approach. Because either somebody will tell you that's not a good idea simply because they're not a consumer of that product.
Right. That's a good point.
Or friends will tell you, oh, I love that idea. That's such a great idea because they want to make you happy.
Right.
And the good thing with Facebook and Instagram is that you can actually just test it out, get it in front of a very broad audience,
Yeah.
and let the market decide if there's an interest in it. And you don't need to buy inventory, you don't need to build a website, you don't need to do all of that work before actually figuring this out.
Yeah.
Because you can simply test it out through an ad, for example, see if people click on the ad,
Yeah.
and then accordingly make that
Right.
decision. Right? It's the easiest way to actually check if there's
Yeah.
interest in your product or service, for example.
Wow.
That's crazy. So after the first product, the first standing desk sells, what was the journey from going from that to you deciding you want to do this full time?
Yeah. So honestly, it's kind of a miracle that this actually grew into a full business, because when you started in the middle of the night in COVID, you're not actually thinking I'm going to quit my job, later down the road and do this full time. I think the journey really was, I got to about 9 or 10 months of doing my full-time job and running this business at the same time. And I was absolutely exhausted. I couldn't do both at the same time, especially because in the first 8 or 9 months, you're actually putting the most effort in launching the business.
Right. So you guys had no external help to build the product. It was just you and your co-founder building the desks by yourselves.
So for the first few months, it was both of us.
Yeah.
Then we hired some people locally to help build it for us.
Okay.
And then we subsequently outsourced it to an American company to manufacture it for us. And then we eventually outsourced it to a company in China to make it for us.
Okay.
So it was a progress.
Yeah.
But like for the first 5 or 6 months, we were making it ourselves just because we didn't even have time to go look for a manufacturer and whatnot. We just had to do it in that moment. So yeah. And then eventually, I think 9 months in, the business had been profitable from the start. And I was completely exhausted doing my full-time job and doing this on the side.
Right.
So eventually I decided at some point you have to take the risk of quitting your job. So I made that decision then, but it wasn't an ill-informed decision because we had been profitable for 8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
So I could make that decision knowing that we were profitable and that I would be able to sustain, my current lifestyle doing this full time.
And was your demand like growing exponentially within those like first 5 months?
Absolutely. I think the demand for desks at that time was at an all-time high. I don't think we'll ever get back to that level ever again. Every single person was interested in buying the desk. I think we also got lucky because we got featured in Forbes and Health Magazine and many other places.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would have happened if we started it today. Just because at the time, however absurd as it sounds, a desk was the product, a desk. And that's why I think it just made it very easy for us to get promoted in many places. We never reached out to them, they reached out to us. So that helped a lot.
Yeah. So you think like in doing entrepreneurship, like definitely timing is a huge factor in the success of your business?
Absolutely. I think luck is probably 80% of it. I would say, of course, you create your own luck.
Yeah.
My friend always was into making products. I was into performance marketing. So we had the knowledge that we needed to launch it. And we had always spoken about ideas. We had given it thought, even though we had never tried something.
Yeah.
If we hadn't done that and we had this idea, we wouldn't have been able to launch pretty much the next day after coming up with the idea. So that made it easy. But I think timing was everything. If we had launched it now, I don't think the business would have existed, just because we would have never seen that momentum that we needed in the first, few months.
Yeah. Do you think like going for people that, want to start their own business and they have like this great idea, right? And they think that it's going to make it big because they just purely believe in their product. Do you think that it's smart to still launch the product even though there maybe isn't the perfect timing for it?
I think you should test it out. Don't go all in.
Yeah.
Especially for a physical product nowadays.
Yeah.
Marketing has become very expensive compared to 2019, even more so compared to 2015.
Yeah.
And getting profitable within the first few months now is very difficult. So you have to keep that in mind before starting a business, especially a physical product.
Yeah.
So I would say test it out and grow it slowly.
Yeah.
Really focus on content and creative, because that's ultimately going to determine your success.
Right.
You said that you sort of got into it really late. You said you were 5 years late to the game already for performance marketing. So if someone were to do it now, or if you were to do it now, what would you do differently?
I wouldn't do that much differently. I think the way my brain works is that I was always focused on profitability from the start. I genuinely love business. And for me, a successful business is one that's profitable. I think one of the things that I noticed when I was working in performance marketing was in 2019, 2018, 2017, these were like the days of easy VC money.
Okay.
I noticed that a lot of companies, really big companies, many that IPO'd in fact, were backed by very much like easy VC money, but they had business models that never made sense to me. The part that always confused me was my advertisers, the ones that I was working with, they were always happy with the work that I was doing for them, which actually confused me because I was looking at the results and I was thinking this is not profitable. And the LTV model that they were explaining to me never made sense to me, and I could never figure out how any of these companies would ever get profitable. Many of them, for example, even the likes of like Allbirds, and there are like actually many infinite examples. It doesn't no need to call out one over here. All their stocks are down 90 to 95 to 97%. Many of the private ones have gone bankrupt.
Yeah.
So my approach always was to just have a profitable business.
Yeah.
And most companies that started in the 2010, 2011 era, or the 2019 or the 2020 didn't do that. So my approach was always to be profitable. I think most businesses had to go towards that in 2022, 2023. It's not even just in the direct-to-consumer space. So my approach was to be profitable from the start. So I wouldn't do anything differently per se. Okay. The only thing I'll say is that it is way harder now to do it than it was even in 2020.
Is that because of the number of players right now? Or just the economics of performance marketing right now?
Yeah, the Meta and Google, all of these platforms have just become more and more expensive.
Okay.
The cost of advertising has gone up dramatically. And you really need to have a very rock solid business model in order to succeed and be profitable.
Do you still leverage like Meta and all these companies that had like the advertising, or do you now have your own websites and so you do advertising like through a different party?
No, it's completely through Meta. We used to do Meta and Google, but we actually cut out Google a couple of years ago.
Okay.
It was very hard to measure attribution, which platform between Meta and Google was driving success. And through some basic tests, it was very clear that Meta was definitely driving results for us, but Google probably wasn't. So we cut out Google and our entire marketing budget goes to Meta, which is not great because, we're completely dependent on a single company and an algorithm to drive results.
Yeah.
Right.
But out of everything that we've tested, it is the one that does drive the best results. So our focus is over there.
Do you think that your previous job had any influence on your job now, or did that impact the way that you do things in your current role?
It had a very little impact. I think working in analytics has made me, ironically, not surprising, an analytical person. So I am generally very analytical and very logical in how I do things. I think all my previous jobs have helped me just become better overall in business and analyzing situations. But one thing in running your own direct-to-consumer business is that it's a very creative game. Creativity is number one. I am very creative when it comes to business solutions, managing different pieces of the business, operations, finance, marketing, and whatnot. But I did not have a creative bone in my body when it came to actually videos and images and creativity and website design and whatnot. And eventually I had to build that muscle. It is the most important muscle for any entrepreneur in the direct-to-consumer space. I would, in fact, go as far to say it's probably the most important muscle for anybody running a company. It doesn't matter if it's a product or not, because sales and marketing and design plays the biggest role in actually acquiring customers. So you could be running a software business, but if you're not, and you may have the best software, but if you're not able to market that and you're not able to design that well and whatnot, nobody's going to, unless you have the best UI, nobody's going to come to it. So I've spent the last 4 or 5 years becoming more and more proficient, with creativity in terms of like images and videos and whatnot. And I never thought that would be me.
Interesting.
You said that, you're a very analytical person. And even when, I think that's when if we were to describe you, that's one of the verbs we'd pick. One of the adjectives we'd pick. But have you ever been in a situation when you were running Intention Design where you saw the data say something, but in your gut, you believed something else? And did you go with the data or did you go with the gut?
I would say, I'll give a slightly different example, which is that we were running this extremely janky website for multiple years. It was one that, me and my co-founder had designed ourselves, not even with a web developer. We didn't even have any web development experience. Obviously, we became better at it over time. And about a couple of years ago, we said, hey, you know what? We should make a new website and we should really make it a much more sophisticated website. Yeah. And we based this on knowledge that we saw on other websites. So we did a lot of research into figuring out what a successful modern day direct-to-consumer website is. And then we went and built it. And it was I'm not one to jump the gun, but the website looked amazing.
Okay.
We were very happy with it. I was certain, and we already had good performance, so that was one of the reasons we didn't rush to make a new website, because our performance was generally good for multiple years. But we thought, oh my God, if we make a better website and make it a new age website, maybe we'll see another 50% jump in conversion rates.
Yeah.
And it absolutely did not work out.
Oh, wow.
This new website, which was just, had the best graphics, best videos, best UI, best interface, they actually performed 50% worse.
Oh, interesting.
And it was incredibly counterintuitive to us, because it genuinely matched the quality we would expect from a direct-to-consumer brand, like a good direct-to-consumer brand.
Yeah.
And I think our end conclusion was that I think our demographics of the people buying our product are much older. It's 45 to 55. Meanwhile, the websites we may have like picked and choosed upon were maybe targeting 25 to 35. And it's because that's the age range we're in.
Right.
So we think these are the best websites.
Yeah.
So I think having this much more sophisticated website potentially was just more confusing for older users. And as a result, the conversion rates dropped. And we eventually moved back to an older version, like a design that was more in sync with the older version of the website. And then we started seeing performance go up again. It completely blew my mind, because we spent nearly like 1.5, 2 years working on this site.
Yeah.
And it just didn't make any sense to us how it could not perform better than our old website.
Yeah.
But that's one example of, using sort of data, which was clearly aligning based on the industry on the new site. But I guess at the end of the day, your demographics determine.
Yeah. So now if you were to make any change, how would you approach A/B testing or product market fit? How would you change that?
I think after like spending 1.5 years on that website, we're not jumping to make any more changes as it is today.
Yeah.
I don't think I would change too much. I'll explain why. Because I think the one thing that's good between me and my business partner is that, we don't let ego determine decisions, and we don't let sunk cost determine decisions. We tried the website. It didn't work. We were not afraid to move back to what we had. We had enough patience to let it run and give it a test. We incurred obviously lower profits during that period. But at the end of the day, you have to take some risks to improve the business. Not every decision you make is going to yield results. I think it's just being able to realize at what point it's, at what point that you have to let go of the fact that you did 1.5 years of work to do this and move back to what works. So I would say, you have to continue testing. I think we're a little bit burnt in that sense right now, so we don't want to test something immediately. But it doesn't mean we won't test something again in the future. It's part of growing, right?
Yeah.
Now that you're doing this full time, do you think that there are pros and cons, or like what are the pros and cons of being your own boss?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest pro, as you've confirmed earlier, because Rima and I play tennis at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday.
I'm not an entrepreneur. I just would like to say, I'm not saying this entrepreneurship money.
She just starts at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. That's the difference. I would say like flexibility and just completely determining my own schedule, being able to work from anywhere, I would say are easily the biggest, positives. Not having to do BS work. Don't get me wrong. I honestly, I feel like most of the work that I've done previously, I've enjoyed it. And I've never had to deal too much with office politics. My managers have generally given me the autonomy to do whatever I want. But when you are working at a bigger company, you spend so much time working on stuff that's not necessarily yielding results right away. A lot of things you do is to convince somebody else.
Right.
And after a point, it feels, like I said, not to call it BS work, but it does feel like that to some degree. I think the one good thing about doing my own thing is that whatever we do it because we want to do it and because we know it's going to have an impact. We never have to beat around the bush between my co-founder and me on appeasing the other person. We do what makes sense. We never do anything that's illogical or a waste of time. I would say those are the two biggest positives. I think the biggest negative is that there's nobody to escalate to.
Escalate yourself.
There's exactly, right? There's just nobody to escalate to. Back in the day, eventually, if you hit a roadblock, you escalate
Right.
to your manager.
Yeah.
When you're running your own business, every problem is your problem to solve. And that can be incredibly aggravating and mentally consuming, let's just say. And then the other thing I would say is it's very hard to have downtime. Even when I'm on vacation, I work every day. Because if I'm not going to do it, nobody else is going to do it.
Right.
I should also call out that we've built this business in a way where we don't want to hire full-time employees. We've contracted a lot of work, whether it's our fulfillment or website development and other things, but we don't want to have any full-time employees. I personally just love the flexibility of doing things in my schedule, in my time. So that obviously adds to the fact that I always have to be on every day.
Yeah.
But I prefer that because then I can just focus on business and execution versus people management, which is not necessarily my biggest skill or interest.
So currently it's just you and your co-founder. You don't have any other employee?
No.
Oh, wow.
We have a third silent partner.
Yeah.
And we've outsourced everything else.
Wow.
Manufacturing,
That's very
fulfillment.
impressive to be able to like run a business like this with only 3 people. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's actually also proves to be very beneficial for other reasons, which is, for example, as I was saying earlier, many businesses in the space, in the direct-to-consumer space, have gone bankrupt over the last 5 years. A vast majority have.
Right.
Or they're performing really poorly. And it's because many of them have such a high overhead. And essentially, they just basically burn so much cash every month that they eventually go bankrupt. Or, even if they're profitable, if they go through a negative period, they burn too much money. And again, it's not sustainable.
Right.
I think the one good thing about just having me and my business partner and my silent partner is that we can always go up and down, and we never have very high fixed costs, is what I would say. Up and down in terms of how much we pay out ourselves. So maybe there's a time when business does really well, we pay out more. But then if there's a down period, we also don't burn money because it's just the 3 of us.
Yeah. And would you say it's really important to find the right partners in business? Because I think a lot of businesses don't end up working because the partner that you initially thought you would be good with didn't work out.
I cannot agree more.
Yeah.
We were friends, my co-founder and I, we were friends for several years before that. Friendship doesn't mean it'll lead into a good business partnership.
Yeah.
Right? But of course, it also helps in terms of having just that knowledge about who that person is, and that person knows who I am.
Yeah.
I think what's helped us is we are very complementary in the skill sets that we bring to the business. So for example, his background is mechanical engineering, supply chain.
Right.
And my background is e-commerce and generally understanding business and operations and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think that helps.
Yeah.
But I also think we generally align on values, on how we want to run the business and where we see the business going. So it means that in 5 years of running the business with him, I think we've argued only once.
Wow.
Which is, I agree. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But it's also very surprising because I feel like when you're starting a business and both folks don't know a lot about how to do, you both are figuring out so much. I feel like there can be so many trains of thought or so many points of views. So it's really cool that you guys were in sync through most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it is that we're just grateful to have this business because it came about from nowhere.
Yeah.
I think what also helped is that we've actually made a very minimal investment ourselves into the business at the start. So the stakes were relatively low. But I think most importantly, though, I think it's just aligning on the values that makes it easy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't debate and we don't discuss and we
Right.
don't have healthy debates and arguments. But ultimately, it never leads to anything more than that because we're aligned on the overall value of where we want the business to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very interesting. I recently read somewhere that, for a business or any sort of group activity or teamwork to work out, you need a sole decision maker. How do you feel about that?
I think there may be a truth to that. Again, to answer that question, just in the context of how me and my business want to function, because we have complementary skill sets, there are areas where we just give the other person the sole decision to make it. So that helps.
Yeah.
But in terms of when we do have to make a joint decision, I think he gives me the leverage to ultimately make that final decision. In an occasion, I think he trusts me.
Yeah.
And he knows that I never make a decision without having a lot of discussion. But I generally feel that I think he's comfortable enough with ultimately, like in many cases, letting me make the final decision. But honestly, most of the time we align. So I feel even wrong saying that because most of the time we're on the same page. But he's not argumentative to the point where, it's going to turn into a big fight or an argument.
Yeah. It sounds like a really good working relationship. Like, I think it's very rare to come by that, because personally, when I was running a startup when I was in college, I think finding out that values don't align is a huge deal. And even though you bring different set of skills to the team and you can make decisions according to people's skills and what decisions are or the decisions relating to different skills, then that person makes that decision. I think at the end of the day, like, if your core values don't align, it makes it very difficult to run a business together.
No, completely. I honestly, thinking about it while you were there phrasing that, I was thinking to myself about all my friends that I know, and I genuinely don't think I could pick a better business partner out of all my friends.
That's great.
So when you started this, there were obviously a lot of unknowns, but what's the most or one of the few surprising things about entrepreneurship that you were like, I didn't realize that would be something I'd have to deal with?
Just how consuming it can be mentally is probably the biggest surprise. Again, that doesn't sound shocking in the slightest, but it can be incredibly consuming, especially during periods when things are not going well.
Yeah.
You just can't stop thinking about it. Any moment that you have with yourself, it'll probably lead you to thinking about the business. I couldn't even watch Netflix for more than 10-15 minutes at one point in my life, like 3 years ago, without my brain suddenly thinking about the business. And I think that's actually very unhealthy.
To not be able to compartmentalize.
Right, or just to not be able to consistently think about the same problem. I think creativity comes from two aspects, which is one is like having a little bit of patience. Because if you try something, let's say you're creative with something and you try something, you have to have the patience to see it through.
Right.
You can't constantly be tweaking and making changes because then you don't know if it was a clean test or attempt at whatever you've tried.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I would say is that I think it's just hard to be creative and find good solutions if you're constantly thinking about it. I think creativity and solutions often come in periods of blankness, right? They say to children, for example, children don't need to be entertained and engaged all the time because when they're bored is when they get creative.
Yeah, they need time to wonder.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think even as an adult, you don't always need to be solving for some problem. So for me, I think a few years ago, I realized that I was spending way too much time just thinking about stuff, which was not actually
yielding anything.
So I think to any entrepreneur, I would say, you've got to have hobbies. You got to go out and do things. Spending all your time thinking about the same problem isn't actually going to yield a better problem or better result.
So from everything you're saying, and this is not a surprise, but it sort of reiterates the point that entrepreneurship is very lonely, because when you're like, say, at a party and you have a problem that you want to solve, you don't really want to talk about it in a party, but you can't like stop thinking about it. So there is an aspect of loneliness to it. And it sounds like you and your business partner do have a very good working relationship, and I'm sure you guys depend on each other a lot to sort of lessen some of that anguish. But is there a community that you found of founders, especially in the DTC space, that helps?
So I think I've done a pretty bad job of finding a community locally that I can talk to and sort of bounce ideas off and whatnot. I probably should be doing that more, especially in San Francisco, doing more networking. But, you read a lot about it online, on Twitter or X, which helps actually in a way, because you read about other businesses when they're suffering, or for example, if Meta is going through some algorithmic change or whatnot, it's not just impacting my business, it's impacting others also.
Right.
So you can read when others are experiencing it. I think generally I've been fortunate to run a profitable business the most of the time that I've been running it. So there haven't been too many extended periods when it's really troubled me an extensive, like a lot.
Yeah.
But reading online, seeing other businesses are also going through the same experience kind of just makes me feel a little bit okay.
Yeah.
Because it's not just you.
Yeah, there is some validation that you get when you're seeing that other people are going through it as well.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it would be helpful for me to like network more locally. I think I've just been so caught up in building the business, and I feel like I have enough tools and resources available to me online. Through forums and communities and whatnot to figure out what's going on, that I've never felt the need per se to go in person. But it's probably something I will do in the next year.
Has being based in San Francisco and setting up shop here helped?
It has, but in an indirect way.
Okay.
It's helped in a way because, I've lived in San Francisco for 10 and a half years. I know a lot of people over here because I've been here for so long. I think my identity and the way San Francisco is, it's kind of just become one the same. I'm not able to really see the difference until I leave San Francisco.
Okay.
I think just being in SF, being around so many entrepreneurial people, so many driven people, so many analytical people just indirectly makes you a certain way.
Yeah.
So to answer like the earlier question that you asked about building a community, I think I haven't done external networking with people that I don't know, but I know a lot of people and generally can talk about what I've been up to. So I think that in a way is my community. I would also say SF has directly impacted my business in the sense that I worked for a performance marketing company in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So we worked with a lot of advertisers in San Francisco. So indirectly or directly, whichever way you want to look at it, the business has been impacted by that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you bring up, being in San Francisco and those around you are motivated and driven. And I think that really helps with like pushing you forward and like the consistency that you have for your company. Not that you wouldn't be consistent if it was by yourself, because I think anyone who is an entrepreneur like has that sort of drive within them. I think it's just being in that environment and being surrounded by people who are the same gives a little bit more push and a little bit more motivation and drive.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just everybody over here has a drive to succeed. Again, because I've lived here for so long, I just assume, anywhere in the world that I go, it's going to be the same. But when you travel to other countries or even outside San Francisco, you realize it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's not to put anybody else down, but I think this city, everyone fuels the other person, right? Everybody is going that extra mile to succeed, and it is a little abnormal when you compare it to most places in the world.
Yeah. And now that you've done this business for like 5 years now, you said, do you think, what are certain ways that you try and improve the business and the product itself so that, it like kind of meets the needs of your customers, assuming that, there are needs that are different as you go along and you like find out more about what the demand is?
Yeah, so we haven't changed the product too much in the last few years because our focus has been more on growing the business, whether that was, one avenue was, of course, internationally or, trying potentially different marketing channels or trying a new website, for example. So a lot of the focus has been on that. How we've been improving the experience of the customers is because we've been doing this for 5 years, we get a lot of feedback and we can see what the most common problems are. And we try to solve them in a scalable way. So, for example, if a customer is consistent, we get a consistent complaint about something.
Yeah.
Rather than me trying to address that problem every single time, we would come up with a video that we would send the customer to actually address that issue. And then people can just watch a video and figure it out. Or if there are like minor tweaks that can be made to the product, we do that. But the idea generally is if anything is a consistent theme, only then do we actually like go towards solving it at a scalable level. But I wouldn't go solve every single problem that every single customer has if it's a one-off.
Yeah, especially because it's a one-off, then it doesn't make sense to spend time and energy into that.
Yeah.
What next for your company? Is there growth that you're planning for the next couple of years? And what does that look like?
Yeah, this may not be the most inspiring answer, but I think my goal is to just maximize revenue and profit and minimize operations and logistics and supply chain. I think my dream as an entrepreneur is to essentially have a business that's profitable and requiring very little manual involvement. I don't think I'm necessarily looking to grow the brand through just additional products or employees or anything like that.
Yep.
I think one thing that made our business unique was that when we launched, one of the criterions that I had for launching was to have a unique product, not something that's already available in the market, easily available, Amazon, sold by many other people. And the reason for that is because when you go down that route, it becomes very much, a race to the bottom. It's more about the cheapest price rather than, the highest profit margins as an example.
Yep.
So my goal really is to have a unique product and just maximize my profitability in that while minimizing operations and logistics. If we ever do come up with another idea, we've always added like accessories to the main product, for example, which we think enhances the value and there is a value prop in bringing those in. Then we do it. And there are ideas that we have for modifications to the product or modifying it for different use cases. But essentially, I'm not going to just grow the business for the sake of growing it. My goal is to maximize profit and minimize, like logistics and supply chain and operations and whatnot.
Yeah.
And just automate as much as I can.
Yeah. I like that you said that, because I think having like read on a lot of like successful businesses, a lot of the times if you notice that these businesses have one really good product that they're good at and they focus on perfecting that particular product instead of growing all different products that they may not be like a specialist in, right? And that's what makes a business successful, is when you know what you're good at and you go and perfect what you're good at. So I like
absolutely.
that.
And there are so many examples of businesses in the direct-to-consumer space that have tried to grow for the sake of growing.
Yeah, they've diversified too much.
And they've gone bankrupt because they, one thing I can tell, which is interesting, is from doing my business, the business that I find most impressive is Amazon. And the reason is, and not surprising because I'm also in e-commerce, and the reason I'm so impressed about them is that I'm running a relatively simple business. We have 2 desks in 3 different colors and 9 accessories. That's not a lot of SKUs. For example, if I'm a clothing brand, I may have like multiple t-shirts in multiple sizes, and I'm suddenly already at 50 SKUs. I'm at very few SKUs relative to most businesses. And even within just these few SKUs, we run into a lot of complications related to supply chain fulfillment, something going wrong with the product. Like, it happens all the time. So what always impresses me about Amazon is that they have managed to reach millions of SKUs and yet managed to have good customer service and somehow manage the logistics and operations in a way that's just is unfathomable. Exactly. It blows my mind. So I think for me, like adding an additional product or a SKU is, especially, we can test anything, but to actually add it into the business, it needs to be a profitable product. Because once you get into the game of inventory, storing it, advertising for it, changing your website for it, changing your marketing for it, it can completely skew the overall business. And it could basically make a profitable business into losing money.
Yeah, that's true.
One thing you mentioned earlier is that the cost of marketing has gone up dramatically in the last 5 years. What are the other trends in e-commerce that you are preparing for?
Of course, in the last few years, I think one of the big trends has been, user-generated content, right? Instead of having traditional marketing and traditional videos and traditional ads, you have ads that are generated.
For people who are listening who don't know what a traditional ad is versus a user-generated one,
a traditional ad is something that is made in a studio, for example. It's looking very polished. It looks like an ad. It's something you might see on TV. While a user-generated ad, it's made by somebody who's literally purchased the product and using it. Actually, most user-generated ads are not made by people who purchased it. There are a lot of content creators on Instagram that are UGC creators, as we call them. So they're not actual owners of the product or like purchasers of the product, but you send them a product and then they'll make a video for it because they're very good at making content for Instagram. Essentially, UGC is organic looking content on Instagram. That's how I would describe it.
So you think that's going to take off in more traditional
It's already been happening for the last few years.
It's quite saturated now, right? Or not saturated, but it's like, it's so competitive.
It's the norm now. It's like the normal. It's no longer the new thing. In fact, many people are almost wondering if traditional marketing is now coming back into the equation because it's become so prominent. Initially, I think the advantage was that it looked very authentic. But now it's becoming evident to consumers that UGC ads are not actually authentic users making those ads. So in a way, it's losing the charm a little bit. I would say, besides that, the biggest trend that's definitely been happening is marketing is becoming more and more automated, algorithmic driven, AI driven. Back in the day, when you set up campaigns, you would set it up with multiple types of targeting and whatnot. And now you pretty much just set up a very basic campaign, feed Facebook creatives, and you let Facebook figure out who it wants to target. You no longer tell who to target. In fact, how they determine the targeting is based on the creative that you feed it. That's why, as I was saying earlier, the biggest thing that an entrepreneur can do, especially in a consumer-facing business or frankly any business, is becoming very good at creative. Even if you're not the one making the creative, you still need to understand what is a good creative and what's not, and help others who are making it for you make what you need. So it's really very much a case of creative, and everything else is being managed by the algorithm. In fact, many marketing agencies are probably at threat
Yeah.
Because marketing agencies essentially set up campaigns and targeting and whatnot. But if they're not creative focused agencies, they're probably going to go out of business because Meta is making it such that you don't need any agency to run anything. It's early days in terms of like AI coming and doing that for you. I can't give you any credible examples that I've seen myself personally of major levels of personalization compared to like a year or two ago, but I think it's probably around the horizon. I guess another big thing to change, I would say, is AI in terms of like setting up a website or setting up ads or making creatives. In fact, what's funny is that, we're talking about UGC, but now there are UGC ads made by AI. So I wouldn't say personalization is probably the biggest thing. I would say really I would say content creation remains the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
And I think AI actually making content is becoming a bigger and bigger thing.
Yeah.
I would say that's probably the most upcoming trend, I would say.
You said something about how like influencer marketing became so big because there was some sort of credibility that people like audiences associated with the person doing the marketing, right? How do you think that's going to be with AI, where it's the most impersonal person who's giving, or not an impersonal entity that's giving you a recommendation?
I think the irony is that there's influencer marketing and UGC creatives have already lost a lot of its credibility. People still use it and people still click on those to buy stuff.
Yeah.
But nobody is necessarily watching most influencers and thinking, oh my God, this is a truly authentic experience anyways.
Yeah.
So there's almost a joke, which is that AI is not going to reduce it any further because it's already pretty low. I think it's more along the lines of when people watch content made by influencers or content creators, is the content intriguing and interesting and solving a pain point for the user?
Yeah.
Or something that's just, like a brand that people want to buy for clothing, because that's not a pain point per se. But I actually don't think AI is going to reduce that credibility per se, because I think that credibility is already relatively low now.
For some of our viewers, I think they'd be very interested to know what advice you would give to someone out there just like starting out, or whether they're thinking about quitting their job and pivoting from like a tech role to being their own boss.
Right. So I think I get this question a lot from friends who always ask me, they have an idea, they're not necessarily loving their tech job, so they quit their job to go run a business themselves. And my answer generally is don't do it. I think the reality is that the grass is not always greener on the other side, but this is also not to say don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. I think the idea is you should test out your idea, work on it in the background, see if you can get traction, and then consider doing it. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing I would say. I think the grass does often look greener, right? But once you actually get into doing it, once you actually get into the act of acquiring customers, getting customers to pay for your product or service, for example, you realize things can be a lot harder.
Yeah.
So I would say keep your job, work on it in the background. Once you get a certain level of traction, then consider doing that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I would say is that there are things to be aware of what being an entrepreneur is like. As I was saying earlier in the podcast, it can be incredibly mentally consuming and you're always on. You should be prepared for that, right? If you enjoy going on 3-week holidays and not doing any work, then you probably should know that's not going to be possible, right? You need to understand the sacrifices you do need to make.
Yeah.
Having a good stable job, in a way allows you to work from 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 9 to 7, whatever you're doing. But then when you're done with work, you're free in the evening, you're free on the weekends, you're mentally free, you're free on holidays. But as an entrepreneur, you're not always going to be in that situation. In fact, more often than not, you are going to be thinking and working almost all the time. Yeah. And then I think from my particular experience, I would say to any aspiring entrepreneur, it would be they should also understand, I think, acquiring customers and getting them to pay for something is incredibly hard. And you should be aware of that. You should be aware whatever business model you come up with. Maybe this is a very tactical answer to that question, but any business model you come up with, you should be aware that 30 to 40% of your revenue could go into marketing. So if you think, okay, I have a $100 product or a $100 service, I'm going to, it's going to cost me this much to sell it to the consumer. That's my product. That's my profit. The difference is my profit. Yeah. Be aware that your business model needs to be a lot more stronger than that, because you're going to spend a lot of money in marketing, sales, and many other unexpected expenses that you just don't know. Right? Yeah. I would say those are like my biggest takeaways. I would like to conclude on a positive note, which is that I certainly do not want to go back and do a full-time job. So obviously, whatever negative thing I may have said over there,
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is I'm still doing it. I still go through ups and downs. I still go through the struggles. There are good moments, there are bad. But ultimately, I love doing my own thing. I love solving problems, and I know I love like solving something that I know is tangible and impactful.
Yep.
I absolutely love that. And I wouldn't change that for anything. So, if you have a curious mind and you love solving problems and you can...
It's very evident when you talk about your business and when you talk about problem solving, how into it you are and how passionate you are. So I think it's just like some people are just born with this spirit, this entrepreneurial spirit, and I think you're one of them.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that any of that was negative. I actually appreciate the transparency of how real it actually is being your own boss, and I think our viewers would also value that a lot. So not negative at all, and we appreciate like you sharing all of that. With that being said, I think like today we took a lot away from this chat with Nikhil. I think it's actually interesting because I guess as friends we don't really like go into depth about all of these challenges that you go through as like your own boss and entrepreneurship. So really appreciate this chat, and I think I took a lot away. I don't know about you, but
I took a little away.
A little away because normally during our tennis and drinking sessions,
it just like
I
shit
end
talk.
up like you're part of that community that I end up talking to this
nice.
about.
I'm very glad to be friends of Intention Design.
Maybe you'll get a desk one day.
Yeah, we'll link the website and
If you guys are interested.
Yeah, we'll link Intention Design, all the socials as well on our bio, so you can check it out.
Yeah, definitely have a look at his products. It's very unique. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikhil.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up for today. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Toodles.
Bye.